Hello world, Augustine Cortez Company Lab from Web3. Today we got a new background. Currently using Loom. If you notice, sometimes I do a blurry background, and that's when I record on Zoom. When I have a screen or on Bubble like this is when I record on Loom, which is a browser extension. Currently, I stepped out of the Zoom, which is where the team is currently hanging out. And just before I go to bed, I want to record here and then call it a day. So, to dive into the area of the daily learning, I really focused on writing. Today, I essentially articulated a baseline premise on a white paper on an objective system for the rules on acquiring knowledge and information through a protocol. And this is not an easy feat. This is something that it's very difficult to articulate because there are objective variables and then there are subjective variables. And the goal with the white paper is to, especially when you're talking with blockchain and technical components, is to be extremely objective. You want this writing to be neutral, and you want this information to not be perceived in a biased tone or narrative. And with education, it's a philosophical conversation, right? It's an area that there's so many directions that it could take, and most of those directions are philosophical. So writing something in the objective spectrum is quite challenging, but I found a good base to do the derivative focus, which is stating facts. Which an example of this would be the opening paragraph I called "From Homo sapien to Human," and I talk about the components that we are primates. We are categorized as Homo sapiens, and we're just another animal on planet Earth. However, our thinking capability through our brain gives us operating system and uh, thinking process that no other animal has. And this is where it gets tricky, right? Like this can tie into consciousness, this can tie into the mind, into identity and uh, gray areas. So what I tried to do with the tone is to do factual information that humans have a brain with a very advanced neurological output. What that can be derived into brain waves through EEG or EEG. And what this leads to is actually neurologically calculated output where other animals can't compare. And the whole premise of this cognitive output, this neurological output, is that we human beings have impacted the world at massive scale compared to any other animal. That's objective, right? From the measurement of carbon footprint, from building infrastructure, from building nation states. All these things are objective. No other animal has gone to this scale. Sure, animals can have communities and tribes, but the scale of impact that humans have is calculatable in terms of impact compared to other animals. And then from there, where it got very difficult was talking about cognition, um, talking about how human beings can think, and this thinking leads to progression. Um, this is where I had a very tough time explaining in this tone, objective tone, because wh- when you think about thinking, what does that entail? There's so many things, and the approach that I took was it's the objective process, which is processing stimulus through our senses, yielding thoughts through chemical reactions, and then this is where the final touch got tricky is giving it meaning. Um, and I went through a loophole like the word meaning can't be defined without using meaning because any meaning you give to the word meaning is meaning itself. Right? So that was like a loop that it just gets very difficult to break through and just to deliver. I think that's the word for that. But I was able to frame it in a objective standpoint that um we induce or I would have to take back to the notes that I put it down as, but from the thoughts we uh, develop, it allows every human to give it interpretation. And then from there, the next step was about how cognition yields invention, right? From anthropology showing us that humans or Homo sapiens started using tools, which were the first axe or the hand rocks. And from those tools, it became a stepping stone for progression and other tools, right? From the tools, they were essentially using stone, they were able to create sparks and led to fire. From fire, it led to agriculture, and these inventions just started to yield more and more. This is where I'm at in the writing on how inventions yield progression for future inventions and how inventions are derivative of cognition, which is an objective process through interpreting senses and yielding thoughts. So, this, I feel like I have an interesting relationship with this project because I do feel it's my life work. For example, even in this video, this book right here, this blue book right here is called Evolve Your Brain. And I really had a passionate phase in my life where I would obsess about learning neurology, about the neurons bundling together to create neurogenesis, neuroplasticity, even like learning about baby brains that they are developing at an extremely accelerated rate, which is the reason that they sleep a lot because their glucose is being consumed through all the senses that, or through all the stimulus that they're experiencing, and then how senses are the interface to stimulus that are tying the connection to the brain, and then the brain creates brain waves, which trigger chemical reactions within the body and how these states affect um, cognition and identity. And this was just one phase in my life. I learned a lot about cognitive psychology, about cognition itself. How does it apply to one's individual component, but also collectively? Also about Homo sapiens. There was a phase where I read a lot about anthropology and evolutionary psychology. So these subjects that I am articulating now have been core passions of my life. And the beauty of this is that all this is leading to essentially blockchain and this protocol where it's this objective rule system of rules that base and prove the acquirement of education, the acquirement of knowledge. And then this will be the premise to discuss the protocol where it's proof of learning, proof of knowledge, proof of skill, and proof of educational identity. Actually, I noticed I didn't talk about proof of learning in yesterday's video. This is what's cool. It's live um, curation and polishing. So proof of learning is essentially not merit data for external usage. It's more of a just internal documentation where it has to be done. The thing is, the reason it's not valuable for external usage is because it's and there's so many variables that won't yield the same exact experience. So, for example, let's say that I learned blockchain 10 hours a week, and this gives me, let's say, we were to put into points and measurements. Let's say this gives me 10 knowledge points in blockchain. However, if a genius learns 3 hours of blockchain in their learning experience and they take the assessment or proof of knowledge and they get, let's say, 14 knowledge points, the data of proof of learning isn't necessarily relevant for each individual. Of course, the more data, the more means, and the more um, processes can be developed from that because it can give averages and other variables that could be valuable as the network effect grows. However, it's not a base priority for um, the act of proof of knowledge and proof of skill. It's just for the sheer documentation um, and interpersonal development of the process. And I think that's to be the first step of getting an MVP for this protocol. I think there's a lot of um, leverage that we can use to build something off this proof of learning, and it being the first step for this protocol that we want to build. So tomorrow, I really want to take another full day to write. Um, this really wore my brain out, and the other half of the day, I was talking to the team about really focusing on the narrative and the utilization for our NFT collection. Also doing some amazing work with the art. Can't wait to start marketing it itself and getting this scholar project out the door because it's going to be a very important piece for us. And even learning about the process on how to market this, on how to not make, on how to make sure it's not categorized as a security, and kind of making sure we're stepping on glass, but we're not breaking through. All right, so tomorrow I'll be writing probably the same approach. I want to get this out fairly soon, but I don't want to rush this because this I do feel like it is going to be a big part of my life's work because it's the articulation of a belief, articulation of knowledge, proof of work, proof of skill, proof of educational identity into one reference point. And the vision or the goal with this piece is it to be a ripple effect among education. You know, if this doesn't become the main source, that's totally fine as long as it pushes for progression and social mobility in the education sector. All right, so with that being said, I will conclude here and I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.